You're nothing more than our unpaid babysitter." When my grandson Matthew said those words, the whole room went silent. His voice was calm, casual even, but it cut through me like glass. 15 years of love, sacrifice, and sleepless nights, all erased in a single sentence. If you've ever poured your whole soul into raising someone, only to be dismissed as if your presence had no value, then you'll understand why I have to tell this story. If you've ever sat at a family dinner table where laughter echoed all around, but not one person noticed your silence, you'll know why these words cannot stay locked inside me any longer. My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 72 years old. I raised my son Daniel alone after his father passed away. When Daniel married Melissa and they had a child, I thought my family was finally whole again. When Matthew was born, they placed him in my arms, and I swore I would protect him with everything I had left in me. That vow shaped the last 15 years of my life. Why am I telling this now? Because last Thanksgiving, at the very table where I once fed Matthew spoonfuls of mashed potatoes, he looked at me not as his grandmother, not as the woman who carried him through every sickness and every nightmare, but as free labor, a babysitter. Nothing more. The smell of roasted turkey and spiced apple pie filled the dining room. The table was set with polished silverware and tall glasses that caught the light of the chandelier. Thanksgiving is supposed to be about gratitude, but that night, gratitude was nowhere to be found. Daniel scrolled through his phone, Melissa whispered to him with a smirk, and Matthew sat across from me with earbuds dangling from his neck. "Grandma, you don't have a job," he said, repeating Melissa's words, almost word for word. "You just watch me. That makes you a babysitter, and babysitters get paid, except you're free." I froze. Daniel cleared his throat but didn't defend me. Melissa sliced into her turkey as if she hadn't heard anything, her face smug in its silence. The words hung in the air like smoke, choking me, daring me to react. But I didn't raise my voice. I never do. I set my fork down and studied Matthew's face. The boy I once held against my chest through nights of fever. The boy who clung to my hand on his first day of kindergarten. The boy who whispered, "Don't go, Grandma," every time I tried to step out of his room. He was gone. In his place was a teenager, molded by the contempt of his parents. That's when I knew this story needed to be told. Not just for me, but for anyone who has been erased in their own family, treated as if love is worthless when it comes without a paycheck. I grew up in a small town in Ohio where family was supposed to mean loyalty. I believed in that with my whole heart. I worked double shifts at a diner to raise Daniel after my husband died young. Every extra dollar went to his future. I thought that kind of devotion would be remembered. Instead, when Melissa came into his life, I slowly became invisible. Her smiles at me never reached her eyes. Over the years, she convinced Daniel that I was more burden than blessing. And yet, when Matthew was born, she handed him to me without hesitation. I became the nurse, the cook, the maid, the nanny. I was everything all at once. "You love babies," she said. And she was right. I loved Matthew fiercely. I sang to him when Melissa disappeared on weekend trips. I stitched his Halloween costumes, clapped for him at every Little League game, and packed his lunches with notes that said, "You can do it." But love, if it isn't respected, can be twisted. By the time Matthew was 15, love had been rewritten as labor. That Thanksgiving night, I smiled faintly and asked him, "Is that really what you think, sweetheart?" He shrugged. "That's what Mom says." Melissa didn't flinch. Daniel avoided my eyes, and I realized that they had all been waiting for me to hear this from Matthew's lips, not theirs. Later that night, alone in the guest room, I sat on the edge of the bed where I had once rocked Matthew to sleep. I stared at the ceiling and replayed every sacrifice I had made. 15 years of being his safe place, 15 years of giving up my own time, my health, my dreams, all reduced to unpaid babysitter. I am telling you this story because silence only protects those who harm us. If I stay silent, I accept that my devotion can be dismissed, that my love can be cheapened, and I will not allow that. My name is Evelyn Carter. I am not just a babysitter. I am a grandmother who gave everything, and this is the story of how my family tried to erase me and how I found the strength to walk away. That night, as I lay awake in the guest room, Matthew's words kept replaying in my head. Unpaid babysitter. The phrase echoed like a cruel refrain, dragging me back through the long years that had brought me here. Every memory felt sharper in the darkness, every sacrifice more vivid. I remembered when Matthew was only a few months old, his cries piercing the silence at 2 in the morning. Melissa would roll over with her silk eye mask in place. Daniel would mumble that he had an early meeting, and it was always me who rose. I would wrap myself in an old cardigan, clutch my aching back, and carry Matthew to the rocking chair. His tiny body burned with fever against my chest, and I would hum the lullabies my mother once sang to me. I can still hear the rhythm of his breathing, shallow and uneven, as I begged silently for his fever to break. Melissa liked to remind me that I was retired, as though that meant my time had no value. "You love babies, Evelyn. Besides, what else would you be doing?" she once said with a laugh, handing Matthew to me before disappearing for a weekend trip. She said it like a compliment, but I knew it was a declaration. My life was theirs to use. I gave up more than they ever knew. I stopped meeting my old friends for Saturday brunches, too tired from the week of chasing a toddler. I skipped trips with my church group, telling myself Matthew needed me more than I needed rest. Even the art class I had saved for, something I had promised myself after retirement, was abandoned after Melissa asked me to watch him just for a few weeks. Those weeks turned into years. And yet I loved him. That love was my anchor. His first steps had been toward me, his little arms outstretched as I crouched on the carpet. His first words, soft and garbled, were spoken in the dim light of dawn while I held his hand. When Melissa forgot his school picture day, I was the one who ironed his shirt and combed his hair until he looked like every other proud first grader. I was not just his grandmother. I was his safety net, his shadow, his everything. But even shadows can be erased. When Matthew started school, Melissa began reshaping the story of who raised him. At parent-teacher conferences, she introduced herself with a wide smile, speaking as though she had been the one practicing spelling words late into the night. She filled photo albums with family trips I had stayed behind to make possible, claiming the title of ever-present mother while I quietly folded laundry in the background. Daniel followed her lead. He started to say things that cut deeper than he realized. "Mom, you're spoiling him. He needs to learn independence." Independence? From what? From the only person who was actually there? I wondered if Daniel remembered how I had stayed by his own side when he was sick, how I had worked double shifts so he could go to college. Or maybe memory is convenient when you want to excuse neglect. There were moments that revealed just how invisible I had become. One winter, Matthew's asthma prescription wasn't covered right away by insurance. I pawned my wedding ring, Robert's ring, to pay for it. Melissa never asked how the medicine was bought. She simply handed me the inhaler and walked away. Another time, Daniel's car broke down and he needed repairs immediately. I gave him my last savings. He didn't say thank you. He just told Melissa, "See, Mom always bails us out," as though that was my job. Still, I held on to hope. Children remember who truly loves them, I told myself. And for a while, I believed it. On Matthew's 7th birthday, he ran past the pile of gifts to leap into my arms. "Grandma, you're my best friend," he whispered, his cake-smeared face pressed against my cheek. That memory carried me through the loneliness of being erased from every photo caption, through the silence when my name was never mentioned. But Melissa was clever in her quiet way. She chipped away at me with small, calculated remarks. "Don't bother Grandma with that. She forgets things sometimes." "Grandma is too old for games. Grandma has nothing else to do, so she helps." Slowly, Matthew absorbed her words. By the time he was 12, he was already turning to his parents for validation instead of me. When I tried to hug him in public, he shifted away, embarrassed. The boy who once clung to me in the night now rolled his eyes when I reminded him to wear a jacket. I kept telling myself it was just adolescence, that he would circle back, that love was stronger than manipulation. But I see now that I was wrong. Endurance is not always noble. Sometimes endurance is surrender. Every time I stayed silent, every time I let their dismissive comments pass without response, I was teaching them that my sacrifices were free, expected, and disposable. Love without respect becomes labor, and labor without acknowledgement becomes erasure. That was my life for 15 years. As I lay in the guest room that night, Matthew's words stabbing at me like fresh wounds, I realized something I had never allowed myself to think before. The night he called me a babysitter was not the moment everything changed. It was simply the moment the truth could no longer be ignored. Thanksgiving was supposed to be a celebration. That year, Melissa insisted on hosting the dinner at their house, and though every part of me longed to decline, I agreed. I told myself it was for Matthew, that maybe we could salvage something of the bond we once had. But the moment I stepped through the door, I knew the night would not end kindly. The house smelled of roasted turkey and cinnamon candles, but beneath the warmth there was a current of tension I couldn't ignore. Melissa greeted me with a smile that never reached her eyes. Daniel gave me a half-hearted hug, and Matthew barely looked up from his phone. I carried a pie I had baked, setting it down carefully on the counter, and for a fleeting moment, I hoped maybe the evening would pass without incident. Dinner began with Melissa at the head of the table, her voice loud and cheerful as she passed around dishes. Everyone spoke over each other, laughter filling the air, while I quietly carved a piece of turkey for myself. I tried to join in, but each time I opened my mouth, Melissa cut me off with a louder story. Daniel laughed at her jokes, nodding along, while Matthew scrolled through his phone under the table. It was in the middle of dessert that it happened. Matthew had just finished a slice of pumpkin pie when he leaned back in his chair, his tone casual, his words rehearsed. "You know," he said, "Grandma is basically just our babysitter. Only difference is she works for free." The table erupted in laughter, Melissa loudest of all. Daniel chuckled and shook his head as if it were harmless fun. But in that instant, every sacrifice I had ever made, every sleepless night, every quiet act of love was reduced to a punchline. I froze, my fork suspended halfway to my mouth. My cheeks burned, but not from embarrassment. This was something deeper, heavier. It was betrayal, pure and unvarnished, spoken not in anger but in mockery. I set my fork down carefully, the clink against the plate louder than any of their laughter. "Is that what you think I am, Matthew?" I asked softly. He shrugged, still smirking. "That's what Mom says. You don't have a job. You just watch me." "So yeah, unpaid babysitter." Melissa's smile tightened, but she didn't stop him. Daniel looked away, pretending not to notice. The silence that followed was suffocating. For a moment, I thought I might shatter right there at the table. But instead, I steadied my voice. "I see," I said simply. The rest of dinner blurred after that. Conversation picked up again, though I barely heard it. I sat quietly, my hands folded in my lap, listening to the people I had sacrificed everything for laugh and chatter, as though they hadn't just stripped me of my dignity. My heart ached, but my face remained calm. Later, after the dishes were cleared, Melissa poured herself a glass of wine and leaned against the counter. "Don't take it so seriously, Evelyn," she said with a laugh. "Matthew was just joking. You know teenagers." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time I saw clearly what had been building all these years. It wasn't just indifference, it was contempt. And worse, it was deliberate. "It wasn't a joke," I said quietly. "It was the truth you've been teaching him." Melissa's smile faltered, but only for a moment. Daniel stepped in quickly, his voice dismissive. "Mom, don't start. He didn't mean anything by it. Just drop it." Drop it. That was always the expectation. Drop every insult, every slight, every humiliation. Pretend it didn't matter. Pretend I didn't matter. But I mattered, even if they refused to see it. That night, as I lay again in the guest room, the words replayed in my head like a cruel chorus. Babysitter. Free. Disposable. I thought of the nights I had held Matthew through storms, the afternoons I had cheered from the bleachers, the mornings I had packed his lunch with care. I thought of the ring I had pawned, the dreams I had abandoned, the years I had given without complaint. All of it erased with one sentence. The betrayal was not just in Matthew's words. It was in Daniel's silence, in Melissa's smirk, in the laughter that followed. It was the culmination of years of erasure, spoken aloud at last, leaving no room for denial. I realized then that my silence had been their weapon. By never defending myself, I had given them permission to rewrite my love as labor, my sacrifice as servitude. And now, they believed it. Even Matthew believed it. As the house fell quiet, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the shadows on the wall. I felt something inside me shift, not anger, not even grief. It was clarity. For 15 years, I had endured, believing that love would be enough. But love cannot survive where respect has died. That night was not just another dinner. It was the moment the illusion shattered. The moment I finally saw my family for who they truly were. The days after that Thanksgiving felt heavy, each morning weighed down by the memory of Matthew's words and the laughter that followed. I tried to bury it, to convince myself that silence would make it fade. But silence had never protected me before. It only made their contempt louder. A week later, Daniel invited me to dinner again. He said Melissa had prepared something special and Matthew wanted me there. I almost refused, but something in me knew this was the moment. It was time to stop hiding behind quiet endurance. When I arrived, the table was already set. The smell of roasted chicken filled the air, and the chandelier glowed above us. Melissa wore her sharpest smile. Daniel poured wine as if nothing had happened, and Matthew sat slouched in his chair, scrolling on his phone. I took my seat at the far end of the table, the place they always reserved for me, and waited. Dinner began like so many others, with chatter that excluded me. Melissa talked about a new yoga class, Daniel discussed a project at work, and Matthew tossed in sarcastic remarks that made them laugh. I stayed quiet, watching, listening, waiting for the opening. It came sooner than I expected. Melissa, refilling her glass, glanced at me and said with a smirk, "You've been quiet, Evelyn. Don't you want to tell us how much you enjoy babysitting for free?" Daniel chuckled, and Matthew looked up, smirking as if the words were a private joke. That was the moment I placed my fork down, folded my hands, and met their eyes one by one. My voice was calm, steady, and cold. "I'm not your babysitter," I said. "I'm the woman who raised this family when you were too selfish or too blind to do it yourselves." The room fell silent. Melissa's smile faltered. Daniel's laugh died in his throat, and even Matthew set his phone down. I leaned forward, my gaze fixed on Daniel. "Do you remember the night you had that big presentation and Melissa wouldn't wake up when Matthew was crying? I was the one who held him until dawn so you could sleep. Do you remember when he couldn't breathe? When his chest rattled with asthma? I was the one who pawned my wedding ring to pay for his medicine." Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. His face flushed, shame creeping in despite his silence. I turned to Melissa. "And you? You say I have no job, that I'm free labor. Do you know what it costs to give up your own life? I stopped seeing my friends, I gave up traveling, I abandoned every dream I had for retirement so I could care for your child. I wasn't free. I paid with my time, my health, my entire existence." Melissa's eyes flickered, the confidence slipping. For the first time, she looked away. Finally, I turned to Matthew. My voice softened, but the weight of my words was heavy. "And you, Matthew, you once told me I was your best friend. Do you remember that? You said I was the one who made you feel safe. I carried you through fevers. I stitched your Halloween costumes. I sat in freezing bleachers to cheer for you when no one else showed up. You think I'm just a babysitter? Babysitters get paid. I gave you everything for free because I loved you. And this is how you repay it? By mocking me?" Matthew's face reddened. He looked down, unable to meet my eyes. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. No one laughed this time. No one dismissed my words as a joke. For once, they had to sit with the truth. I leaned back, my voice quiet but sharp. "You've taken my sacrifices for granted because I never demanded recognition. You thought silence meant weakness, but silence was just love. And tonight, that silence ends." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Melissa crossed her arms, and Matthew fidgeted with his phone. None of them spoke. The truth had landed, and it left them nowhere to hide. I stood, steady and deliberate. "I won't be erased in this house anymore. You don't have to thank me. You don't even have to like me. But you will no longer dismiss me." Without waiting for their response, I gathered my coat and walked toward the door. Behind me, the room was still. For once, no one dared to laugh. No one dared to speak. That night, as I stepped into the cold air, I felt lighter than I had in years. They had heard me. Whether they admitted it or not, the truth had pierced through their denial. And once spoken, truth cannot be unsaid. In the days after I confronted them, the silence in Daniel's house was louder than any argument. No phone calls, no invitations, no perfunctory check-ins. For the first time in years, they left me completely alone. At first, it hurt. Then I realized it was a gift. Silence from them meant peace for me. I began to reclaim small pieces of my life. I went to the farmer's market on Saturdays, something I had not done in over a decade. I met an old friend for coffee and laughed until my cheeks ached. I even signed up for an art class at the community center, painting with hands that had long forgotten how to create for themselves. Each stroke of color felt like breathing again. But Melissa and Daniel were not handling my absence as well as they pretended. It showed in the frantic phone call that came 3 weeks later. "Mom," Daniel said, his voice tight, "we need your help." Matthew has been refusing to listen. He stays out late. He talks back. "Melissa and I are exhausted. Can you come stay with him for a while? Just until we get things under control." For a moment, I almost said yes. The instinct to rush to Matthew's side was still there, as natural as breathing. But then I remembered his smirk at Thanksgiving, the way he parroted Melissa's words, the laughter that followed. I remembered the weight of my wedding ring in my palm the day I pawned it for his medicine. I remembered the years erased with a single phrase, "unpaid babysitter." So I answered calmly, "No, Daniel, I cannot." He was silent, stunned. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no," I repeated. "You and Melissa wanted me out of the role you reduced me to. Now you have it. Raise your own son." The line went quiet before Daniel muttered something about me being selfish and hung up. For the first time in my life, I did not feel guilty. Weeks turned into months, and their polished image of control began to crumble. Matthew skipped school, his grades plummeted, and his teachers called constantly. Melissa was overheard shouting at him in the driveway, her voice shrill, her composure cracking. Daniel confided in a cousin that he barely recognized his son anymore. Meanwhile, Matthew himself began showing up at my doorstep unannounced. At first, he stood there awkwardly, hands shoved in his pockets, muttering excuses about needing a quiet place to study. I let him in without a word. He sat at my kitchen table, head bent over his books, the silence between us heavy but not hostile. One evening, after hours of quiet, he finally looked up. "Grandma," he said softly, "I didn't mean it that way, about the babysitter thing." I looked at him steadily. "But you did mean it, Matthew. You believed it because that's what you were taught. Words have weight, and once spoken, they cannot be undone." He dropped his gaze, shame flickering across his face. For the first time, I saw the boy I once knew, the boy who had whispered that I was his best friend, the boy who clung to me in storms. He was buried deep but not gone. As Matthew's visits grew more frequent, Melissa's fury grew louder. She called me one night, her voice sharp. "Stop undermining me, Evelyn. He's our son. You had your time. Now step back." I let her words wash over me before answering, calm as always. "Melissa, I stepped back. You asked me to. And this is what it looks like." She hung up on me. Not long after, Daniel came to see me in person. His face was lined with exhaustion, his shoulders slumped. "Mom, we can't control him. He only listens to you. Please, just help us this once." I shook my head gently. "Daniel, you and Melissa made it clear I was not family, only a servant. Servants do not return when dismissed. I will not be used again." His eyes filled with regret, but it was too late. The damage had been done, and the roles they had forced upon me were no longer mine to carry. Slowly, painfully, the truth began to dawn on them. Without my steady presence, the cracks in their perfect household became fractures. Melissa's control slipped, Daniel's passivity was exposed, and Matthew's rebellion forced them to confront the consequences of years spent dismissing me. I watched it all quietly, not with spite, but with clarity. They were paying the price, not through my revenge, but through the absence of my devotion. They had taken my love for granted, and when it was gone, they realized what they had lost. For the first time in years, I felt no anger, no bitterness, only freedom. Their downfall was not my doing. It was theirs. The day I truly let go was quieter than I expected. No dramatic arguments, no slammed doors, no final cruel words. Just silence, the kind that settles into a house when everyone has left and only the truth remains. By then, months had passed since I told Daniel and Melissa no. Their calls had dwindled. Their visits stopped altogether. Even Matthew's footsteps grew rare, though every now and then he still appeared at my door, uncertain and hesitant, like a boy trying to find his way back. Each time, I welcomed him in, but I did not press him to stay. Love, I had finally learned, cannot be forced. It must be chosen. I began to rebuild a life that had nothing to do with their demands. I spent mornings tending to my small garden, afternoons in art class painting wildflowers in shades of blue and gold, evenings walking around the neighborhood with women my age who reminded me what friendship felt like. Slowly, the years I thought I had lost began to return, not in time, but in meaning. One Saturday, while I was arranging flowers in a vase, Matthew knocked on my door. He looked older, heavier with guilt. He shuffled into the living room and sat at the edge of the couch. For a long time, he said nothing. Then, quietly, he whispered, "I'm sorry, Grandma." The words hung in the air, fragile and trembling. I sat beside him, placing my hand on his. "Matthew, apology matters, but what matters more is what you choose to carry forward. You can let someone else's words shape how you see people, or you can decide for yourself." He nodded, eyes wet, and for the first time in years, I saw the boy who once clung to me, the boy who whispered I was his best friend. Maybe he was not gone after all. Maybe he was just buried under the noise of his parents. I did not need revenge. Their punishment was already unfolding in the lives they had built, lives without gratitude, without respect, without peace. Melissa lost her grip on the image she loved so much. Daniel wrestled with the consequences of his silence, and Matthew was forced to reconcile the difference between love and labor. As for me, I found freedom in walking away. I discovered that letting go was not defeat, it was liberation. I no longer carried the weight of being their crutch, their excuse, their invisible servant. I was Evelyn Carter, 72 years old, a grandmother who had given everything and survived the betrayal of being erased. And now I was simply myself. Looking back, I see the lesson clearly. Love without respect is exploitation. Devotion without recognition is erasure. And silence in the face of injustice is not peace, it is surrender. If you give endlessly without boundaries, some people will never see you as generous. They will only see you as available. But there comes a point when even the kindest heart must say no. That no is not cruelty, it is clarity. It is the moment you choose yourself. Tonight, as I sit by the window with the cool autumn air drifting through the curtains, I finally feel at peace. My story is not one of revenge, but of release. The price of my silence was high, but the reward of finding my voice is immeasurable. And if you are listening, if you have ever felt invisible in your own family, erased by those you loved most, know this: you are not alone. Your sacrifices matter, even if they never thank you. And one day, you too will find the strength to walk away with your dignity intact. I am Evelyn Carter. This is my story. If you stayed with me to the end, I hope my journey has reminded you of your own worth. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, stories of resilience, betrayal, and quiet strength, then stay close. Subscribe, listen, and share. Because sometimes the stories we carry are the very ones someone else needs to hear to finally let go.